Hello friends, this is Dr. Sangram Patil again. This chapter, Control and Coordination, is quite interesting chapter in your Biology Year 10 CBSE book. It talks about how various movements, various activities that can be voluntary or involuntary, reflex or non-reflex activities are controlled and coordinated in human as well as plant bodies. If you remember in your last chapter on life processes, if you haven't watched it already, you can watch it on the channel. There's a nice chapter I have done in 5 sections, and you can watch it there, full chapter, life processes. Remember, this is a biology resource and it's freely available on this channel, and you can access it anytime. Anyone can access it. Now in this chapter we'll talk about the control and the coordination. Now if you remember the science of life we discussed in the life processes chapter, that section discusses about the objects that move, so movement as a sign of life. And then we also talked about growth does produce movement, visible movement in the plants. So if the growth is visible, that will cause visible movements. But sometimes the growth may be so slow, that so subtle, that it may not produce any obvious movements. And there are movements that are not related to growth. So growth unrelated movements, such as running, cycling, chewing. The cows and the buffaloes, they chew a curd. So these are non-movement related activities. These are signs of life. So visible movements, example, children playing on a swing, or buffaloes chewing a curd, or any bright light falling on your eyes that causes your iris, your pupils to constrict, to pupils to become narrow. When you touch a hot object, your hand is withdrawn suddenly. So these moments, they take place in response to the changes in the environment. And some of these moments are protective, some of these moments are for the maintenance of the life, and some of these moments may not be protective or maintenance. They just may be for the pleasure or enjoyment, like children playing swing, or some children cycling, all these kind of moments. So if we think about all these moments, they take place in response to the environment. Okay, so movements are in response to environment, and these movements are very carefully controlled, and that control takes place by a specialized set of tissues, okay, that recognize the environment change and carry out specific actions and movements that are needed. So we're going to look into this specialized set of tissues in the body, talk more about them, learn how they control these movements in response to the change in the environment, and how the coordination takes place in multicellular animals like human beings. So let's look at the nervous tissue, nervous system in animals. So the control and coordination of animals and human beings in multicellular organisms takes place through nervous and muscle tissue. Okay, and we have learned in last year of your academics that this control, how this control is done, how coordination is done by the nerves and the muscles. So touching a hot object will result in urgent withdrawal of the hand. So this change in the environment, okay, comes to the skin and it is detected by our body, and the danger signal is detected and the hand is withdrawn. And how does that happen? How does this change is detected? So this dangerous signal is detected by specialized tips of some of our nerve cells. And what are these special tips of nerve cells are called? They are called receptors. They are located in our sense organs and they detect the danger signals. Now this information from the environment is detected by the receptors. Okay, now what are these receptors and where are they located? So let's look into more details of these receptors. So this diagram tells you the different type of sense organs. They have different receptors located in them. So I have taken this receptor diagram from internet just for your understanding. You don't need to know these receptors in detail at all. Okay, this is just for you to have more understanding of how these sense organs are able to detect the changes in the environment with the help of different receptors that are located in the sense organs. So what are the sense organs? We have these 5 sense organs that detect environmental change, and these are ear, skin, nose. Okay, then there are 2 sense organs in the ear, the sound receptor and position receptor in the ear. Okay, and we have light receptors in the eye. So we have position receptors in the ear, they are sense organs and they are receptors. We have skin receptors that can be touch, pressure, pain, temperature receptors in the skin. We have chemical receptors in the nose, and one thing that haven't been mentioned here in the former diagram is a tongue. Okay, so your tongue has gustatory receptors. So gustatory means taste, and nose has olfactory receptors. Olfactory, okay, receptors, that means related to the smell, odor, and gustatory related to taste. So these are chemical receptors, sound receptors in the ear, and light receptors in the eyes. So these are different sense organs. Okay, and the specialized tips of the nerve cells, that is receptors, that are located in these organs, they look like this. So vision, hearing, smell, taste, and the skin receptors. Yeah, so you don't need to know these things in detail. So that's about sense organs and receptors. Now we'll go more in the details of these cells and their receptors that are located at the end, at the tip of their dendrites. So this is a typical nerve cell. Okay, and the nerve cell has got dendrites. These are the fibers that carry signal towards the nerve cell. Okay, so the dendrites will carry signal, that is impulse, towards the nerve cell body, and there is an axon, single axon, multiple dendrites and single axon that carries impulse away from the nerve cell body. Okay, and then this axon will have nerve endings, and these nerve endings can land on another nerve, the dendrite area of the nerve, or they can land on muscles, or they can have a connection, junction, synapse with gland. So this is called as synapse or junction. Okay, these are the medical terminologies or scientific terminologies for the joining or connecting of 2 structures here in this relation. Now nerve synapsing with another nerve, so axon branches synapting with the dendrites is neuronal synapse. Okay, neuronal synapse. The branch of the axon ending onto the muscle fiber is neuromuscular synapse or neuromuscular junction. Okay, so NMJ, that's its short form. We use it quite often in medicine. And we have a neuroglandular junction. So when nerve fiber ends on a gland and carries the signal, delivers the signal there, it's called neuroglandular junction. We will go into more details of this in next few minutes. So this is again showing you axon, its branches, and the branches ending on the muscle fiber, and that's a neuromuscular junction. This is shown in more details. So neuromuscular junction, NMJ. Okay, so that's the basic of these junctions. You don't need to go into more details of these neuromuscular junctions or neuronal junctions. But what basic you should know is, at this junction, the axon that carries electrical impulse along its fiber, when it arrives at the tip of the axon, it causes release of chemicals. Okay, so the chemicals are released, and these chemicals then act on the membrane of the muscle or the gland or the dendrite to transmit the message. Okay, so release of the chemicals at the synapse or the junction causes transmission of the electrical message, and this is how the nerve impulses are transmitted from the nerve to nerve, nerve to muscle, or nerve to the gland, and then further action will be carried out. Okay, so nervous tissue is made up of organized network of nerve cells or neurons. Nerve cell is also called as neuron, and these are specialized for conduction of information via electrical impulses from one part of the body to other part of the body. Okay, so these are specialized cells that carry electrical information from one part to the other part of the body. So there is a activity that is described in your book, CBSE book, activity 7.1, and the activity asks you to test some sugar in your mouth. Although I will not advise you to eat sugar, because sugar is not healthy food, so I won't advise, but the activity asks you to test it, and then it wants you to test it again by pinching your nose between your thumb and index finger, and then test the sugar again, and they want you to tell what the difference is between two tests when you eat sugar with nose open and eat sugar with nose closed. Okay, so they want you to repeat the same thing while you are eating your lunch. Block your nose in the same way and see if there is a difference in the taste of the food between when nose is open and the nose is closed. So, and if there is a difference, what is the reason? So the explanation of this experiment is given in this diagram. So when we eat anything, whether it is a sugar or any substance that has got a odor, sugar has no odor. So anything we eat, the flavor is a function of both taste that is done by tongue and smell that happens in the nose. Okay, so smell and the taste both give rise to flavor. Okay, so it's a function of both mouth and nose. And how it is carried? So from tongue and mouth area, the nerves carry the sensation to the brain, and from nasal area the nerves reach the olfactory bulb and they carry the sensations to the brain. So both the sensations from the receptors in the mouth and the receptors in the nose, they go to the brain, and then brain centers, they interpret the flavor. So flavor is made up of both taste and smell. So when you eat something like sugar, that has no odor, okay, no smell. So the sugar tastes same with nose open or closed, because even if you close the nose, it doesn't make any difference to tasting a sugar because it is odorless. But if you taste something that has got odor, that has got smell as well, such as your any products of your herbs, masala, they will make a strong smell, and you have to smell to be able to have its proper flavor. So if you block the nose, because you can't smell them, your flavor will be different. They will feel different when you are eating, when the nose is blocked and when the nose is open. Okay, I hope that explains you the activity 7.1. Now the next topic, that's very important topic. Okay, before we move on to this, we'll talk about blocking of the nose in flu or in common cold or in other diseases, other conditions when the nose gets blocked, such as when you have the nasal septum deviation. You don't need to know this, but the nose cartilage gets deviated. So normally it should be straight and central, but if the nasal cartilage gets deviated on one side, then it can create problem with smelling, and then you can taste food differently. And in flu, cold or other diseases, the receptors in the nose, they malfunction because of the obvious blockade there or other changes, and then you cannot feel the proper flavor of the food. That's why you don't feel like eating when you are ill. Okay, so that's about the taste and smell activity you were asked to do. Now let's move on to the reflex action. It's a very important topic, and a lot of time and energy will be needed to understand this reflex action. Now this is important diagram of reflex action. Okay, but I'll come to this diagram a bit later. I'll keep it here for you, but I'll talk about the word reflex itself. So reflex means some activity. In common day-to-day language, we use this word when we talk of actions that do not need any thinking. A quick response, like I jumped out of the way of the bus reflexly. I pulled my hand back from the flame reflexly. I was so hungry, my mouth started watering reflexly. So here they're talking about some actions, they take place in response to the change in environment that do not need any thinking. They take place very quickly, immediately. So we're going to see how these kind of actions are controlled, how they are coordinated. Okay, now let's have an example as shown in this diagram. Now, okay, there's a hot boiling water in this pan, in this pot, and it's a really hot pot, and now we are touching this hot heated pot with our skin, with your hand. remember there are receptors in your skin. So if I want you to remember again, so the skin has got touch, pressure, pain and temperature receptors. You remember from your first diagram? So the skin has got touch, pressure, pain and temperature receptors. What are receptors? Receptors are the nerve endings, specialized tips of the nerve cells. So if you feel anything hot, suddenly what will happen? Or if you feel the heat, the flame of the candle, what will happen? Your hand will be suddenly withdrawn. You will move the hand without even thinking anything else. Why will you do that? You will do it to protect your hand. Okay? You don't even need to think to take your hand away from very hot object or from a flame. This is taking place because of the reflex action, and we'll see how this takes place. Okay? Now I said in the beginning that reflex word is used when something happens without going through the thinking process, without you needing to think anything. So thinking takes place in a brain. It's a complex neuronal function that takes place with the complex processes that take place in the neuronal circuits in the brain. Okay, but reflex is something that doesn't need to go through this thinking process. So if you are you touching the hand to the hot pan, or your hand coming in contact with a hot flame, if the signal goes from sensory neurons to the spinal cord, and then from spinal cord it goes to the brain, and if brain signal, so here I'm showing you the same thing but with a different receptor, the stimulus of a food to the eye, then sensory neuron carrying signal to the brain, then brain thinking centers, they have to process that input sensory signal and then make a decision. So it has to go through a thinking process that takes a time, and then once the brain has made a decision after thinking, then it orders the muscles through the output signal, that is motor neuron, and then the action is carried out. So it takes a long time. But if you have to quickly grab the apple without even thinking, just very quickly by a reflex action, then you have to bypass this track. Okay, so the sensory neuron sends the signals to the spinal cord intermediate neuron, that is called as relay neuron, and then that spinal cord relay neuron gives signal to the motor neuron, and the motor neuron carries out the action of the muscles. Okay, I'll explain you the same using the previous original diagram. If you see there, the sensory neuron carries signal from the skin to the spinal cord. It transmits information to the relay neuron. The relay neuron will transmit it to the motor neuron, and that orders the muscle action, and the hand is withdrawn away from the dangerous stimulus. So this is a spinal level arc. Okay, arc, that is why it is called as reflex arc. Okay, so reflex circuit at the spinal level. It doesn't need orders from brain, it doesn't need thinking from brain or decision making from brain, but signal is still sent to the brain, but the action is carried out locally with the local information. This is called reflex action. Okay, now the reflex arc is formed in the spinal cord itself. Okay, though the information input also goes to reach the brain. Okay, and what is the significance of this reflex action and reflex arc? So imagine if you have to send signals to the brain centers to take this action every time, even in emergency, when you are in danger, when the animal is in danger, then this will take a long time. This is a higher brain function, okay, complex function. It takes a time to make decision through this route. That is why in lower forms of animals, this network, this spinal arc was developed to make it possible to take quick actions without thinking, without having to go through brain. In fact, the lower forms of animals don't have this higher function of complex thinking and decision making. They only rely on this. And as the animals have evolved into more complex animals like human beings, and we have got more complex brain, more developed brain, we have a thinking ability. But still, we have reflex mechanisms in place that work much quicker than the route taken through transmission to the brain, then thinking, and then making complex decision, and then conducting action. So spinal reflex arc is quicker even in animals like human being. Okay, so this is a protective and helps us in protecting when the danger is there in front of us, when our body is at risk. Then this reflex arc, this protects us. Okay, so this I hope this should be clear to you. Now reflex arcs are formed in the spinal cord itself, remember that, but the information still goes to the brain. Okay, and why this shortcut is there? Because this is the easiest place for the nerve to order the motor neurons. So if the sensory information is coming to the spinal cord, this is the easiest route for them to act. Instead of going anywhere else, they just feed back to the motor neurons through interneuron, and the motor neurons then order the muscles to contract and they take the hand away. Okay, so the point where these two nerves, the sensory nerve and the motor nerve, they meet is the easiest and the closest point to ensure that this action is carried out safely. Okay, so that's about reflex arc. Now there is an activity they want you to do in your book, and the activity is related to, again, the reflex arc. They want you to trace the sequence of events that occurs when a bright light is focused on your eyes. So when the bright light is focused onto the eyes, what will happen? So this is a normal eye, and this is with the bright light shown into the eye. So you can see the pupil constricts. Okay, it becomes small as soon as the light is shown. The pupil constricts. And how does this happen? So this is also called as pupillary light reflex. Okay, pupillary light reflex, and it's a protective reflex that protects our inner eye structures from excessive light. And now what are they want you to trace the sequence of events. So what happens is the stimulus, that is light, goes on to the light receptors that are located into the retina of the eyeball. So if this is an eyeball, the light entering there, they fall on the retina. So retina is the inner membrane of the eyeball. Okay, that's where the receptors for light are located. From retina, the sensory neurons, they go to the brain. Okay, in the brain they go to the different structures for decision making, but the signal is also sent for the reflex arc for the action to be taken at the reflex level. Okay, so they go to the relay neuron. From relay neuron, it goes to the motor neuron. Okay, and motor neuron will cause constriction of the muscles of iris. Okay, and iris constriction will cause pupillary constriction. So the pupil will go narrow. So this is the response. So light is the stimulus that falls on receptor, that is retina. Then there is a sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, effector is iris, and the response is pupillary constriction. So pupil constriction is a response. So this is a reflex pathway followed in pupillary light reflex. That is your activity that has been described in your book, CBSE book. Now let's have a look at some examples of reflex actions. So involuntarily responding with some action to changes in our environment without any thinking is called as reflex action. We have seen that. Now see in this example, someone is putting their foot on the thorn or a nail, and before they even start thinking of it, before even they realize, the foot is withdrawn from that danger. Okay, so that's a reflex action. Now there's another diagram that explains the pupillary light reflex more easily, but I've explained you already. Yeah, so stimulus, a bright light, receptor in the eye, that is in the retina, sensory nerve, relay neuron in the brain, but that doesn't go into the higher thinking brain parts, it just goes to the relay neuron, and motor nerves, they are ordered to cause constriction of the iris muscles, causing pupillary shrinking, pupillary constriction. Okay, so that's about reflex action. Now we're going to move on to a very interesting topic about brain function, human brain, that helps in coordination and control of the movements in human beings. So human brain, remember this is just an introductory part in your book, because at your level you don't need many details about human brain. When you go to your next classes, year 11 and 12, you will have more details. And if some of you want to go to medicine, then in medicine you will have great details of the study about human brain. So we've studied that reflex action at the lower, in the lower body parts, takes place at the relay neuron level, and for lower body parts it's in the spinal cord. Okay, so though the reflex action takes place there, the signal is still sent to the brain. Okay, and it comes to the brain. So spinal cord and the brain both are made up of nerves, and the nerves carry information from one part of the body to the other, and there is a massive network of nerves in the body, especially in the brain and spinal cord. Okay, the thinking is a higher function, and that takes place in the brain. It's a complex function, and control on and coordination of the body also lies in this part of the brain, of the central nervous system. So central nervous system, and there is a peripheral nervous system. Okay, and there is third called as autonomic nervous system. So peripheral nervous system means the nerves that are there in the body outside the brain and spinal cord. Okay, central nervous system are made up of brain and spinal cord, and autonomic nervous system controls the functions that are involuntary in the body. So we'll have a look at them later on in this chapter. Okay, so central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, that coordinates, controls the responses of the body, and brain and spinal cord are the central nervous system. They receive information from all over the body. They integrate this information. Okay, so we will look into the further details of human brain, spinal cord, the central and peripheral nervous system, and how they control and coordinate in part 2 of this series. So this is end of part 1 of your control and coordination series. Let's meet in part 2 in next video.